Okay, welcome to Bottom Line with Bob and Kendel Ehrlich. This is episode number 7. Please follow us at Earl, EHRL, Bottom Line, at Bob_Ehrlich, or at Kendel Ehrlich. So here we are in our 7th episode.
Here we are. You look lovely
It's
today,
exciting.
by the way.
Thank you.
You got all dressed up.
To be in our studio room, in our house.
Must be Sunday. We wanted to begin the show this week with a little bit of follow-up. We talked about my dad last week and how much we miss him, how much we loved him, how much of a central character he was in my life, our lives, really, our family's life.
Our children had great grandparents with your parents here.
And not just dad, but all dads, most dads, I would say most dads. There's certainly some bad dads out there, but there's an awful lot of great
Mostly
dads.
Good dads.
And I was thinking about this, babe, as I was reading, and you just read a few of the dozens and dozens and probably now hundreds of letters, notes, emails, texts we've received offering condolences over the past 10 days. Many of these notes, these letters, talk about the loss of a parent.
Yes.
From our friends in their respect, their experience in losing a dad, and the central role that their dad had played in his or her life. And it just got me to thinking how this whole issue of fatherlessness has been transformed over the past decade. Actually, since the Obama administration. And to President Obama's credit, he talked about the plague of fatherlessness.
He did.
And this
good for him.
Whole thing, good for him. But now in the modern uber, ultra, progressive left, it's somehow become a racial issue. That you can't talk about, you're not supposed to talk about fatherlessness as a policy issue, as though it's a non-issue. And it's a huge issue, as we know. I've written about fatherlessness in the past. I've gone back to Daniel Patrick Moynihan, over 50 years ago now.
He was so right on.
He was so right on. Now, his work at the time was with regard to the African-American family, but over the past 50 years, clearly we've seen his points concerning lack of fathers and the dysfunction that follows applies to all. Forget race. It applies to all families.
It was also part of the New Deal and the welfare state, and sort of rewarding a single family home or a single parent home.
Yeah.
And the lack of a father in that home has really shown up long term.
You'll recall, I forget which book it was now. One of my books, I talked about my experience coaching the Cape St. Clair Cougars. Right? Linebacker coach. People ask me the most important job I ever had. Congressman, governor, whatever. No, I was a linebacker coach for the Cape St. Clair Cougars for 6 years actually, and was able to coach my son Drew. And I talked about in one of my columns, one kid in particular who we knew came from a difficult background, who did not have a dad. And it got to be, as I spent more time in kids' sports, watching young boys play, interact, I could get really to the point where I could guess almost every time correctly which boy did not have a dad, or at least a father figure, a male figure at home. And it really wasn't that difficult. We've talked about this over the years. And one of my great frustrations as a result going forward now is to see how this has become such a political issue and politicized, and that there are some people out there trying to get across to America that fathers aren't important.
And to the extent that the black community says that this is a racial issue.
Well, the black community doesn't say that, but some
people do within the black community.
Yeah.
Or if they want to make it a racial issue, it's not a racial issue. The impact is in every home that's fatherless. And it is important to recognize that father figure has a real impact on boys. In what way?
In every way.
Discipline. Example.
Yes.
Emphasis. boys in particular need that strong example. Also, I think they need accountability to somebody. And that
Yes.
father figure is really important in those types of words: accountability, example. I know from our boys, watching you, having coaches that have influenced them. And I know in my life, teachers influenced my life. So to the extent there's a male teacher that can help influence a young boy who does not have a father figure in the home, it's really important.
It's one of the reasons we love teacher coaches. It's one of the reasons we love youth sports, because it gives boys and girls, but our experience obviously has been with boys, the ability to be influenced by that male figure, by that authority figure, by that discipline figure, by that love figure, right? We talk about sometimes rules and discipline, but we're talking about love.
It is love, and it's also respect for authority. Fast forward, look at how the police are viewed now, where in our day, as an authority figure, there was a deferential treatment to those that were serving in the way that police serve our communities.
Going back to my article and my experience, and that particular kid I'm thinking about, he would not respond to authority. You could see that he had no authority in his life, and as a result was able to do his own thing, to his own detriment, by the way. Right. And again, and we see this uber progressive mindset out there that tends to degrade the role of fathers, and it's something that needs to be combated, needs to be confronted, it needs to be taken down.
Absolutely.
So on that note, my dear...
Well, the welfare state, though, did encourage that. I've often thought that maybe we should pay the family to have the father in the home.
Yeah. Well,
because that system really encourages not to have the father there. It pays not to have the father in the home.
We will go back to subsidizing bad behavior in a few minutes. Remind me of that. In fact, you'll be reminded of it as we talk about really the issue front and center in American politics today, which is immigration, particularly illegal immigration. Again, I guess we sound like our parents, but our parents were right on an awful lot of issues. The cliches are true. We are a nation of immigrants. We love immigration, legal immigration, people who follow the law, people who were willing to wait, in many cases, sometimes for years, by the way, with regard to the process of becoming legal citizens. It's a wonderful, beautiful ceremony. We love it. It's the melting pot. It's America. It's all the cliches that happen to be true. And very few people disagree with this. But again, we have this new mindset on the left that does have a contrary opinion. So borders protect citizens. We know without a border, you have no country. Without a border, you have no culture. And we've talked, and I've written a lot about the American culture, a singular American culture, which is the melting pot.
Yeah, the melting pot.
Yeah. Assimilation.
Right.
It's something we have celebrated for most of our history.
Years ago, it was Europeans.
Yes, exactly right. It doesn't matter where you come from.
You're German, I'm Polish.
Yes, we've talked about the hard-headed children.
Yes.
And by the way, this is not a partisan observation. Democrats have failed. Republicans have failed. Both party establishments have failed. Republican presidents have failed. Democratic presidents have failed. There's been a failure of will to really actually, honest to God, enforce the laws of the land when it comes to immigration for the past 30 years. On the left, there's been an enthusiasm for borderlessness, for open borders. On the right...
They see votes.
Correct.
In that.
And on the right, it's been cheap labor, sponsored in many cases by business groups. So it's a bipartisan failure.
But in large part, President Trump was elected on this issue.
Certainly, it's one of the major issues. And now listen, speaking of which, good segue, it's not as though things were perfect in the Trump administration. You'll recall in the middle of his administration, the caravans from Central South America, we had a real problem at the border. So what happened? Well, He doubled down on the wall.
wall.
He doubled down on intel and human assets. In other words, the Border Patrol. And he got Mexico to agree to a stay in Mexico policy, which brought
was
some
key,
process.
as you can see now.
Yeah, it brought some process to what was a very, very dangerous situation where kids were punished.
Trafficking, human trafficking.
Well, you're the expert on that.
Well, the issues for me are drugs and human trafficking when it comes to the border.
So this was an issue during the campaign. It was, I thought, a strong point of his administration, the Trump administration, in that there was a problem. It's been kicked around for years. He came up with a coherent strategy that pretty much worked, by the way.
Well, and certainly during COVID, shutting the border down was important. And, he did the right thing.
He did the right thing, and he had a successful policy. Now, which brings us to the election. It's not as though people should be surprised about what's gone down over the past 2 months. Candidate Biden, former Vice President Biden, campaigned on generally an open borders platform, on reining in ICE, on stopping the wall. That's precisely, by the way, what he's done. He stopped wall construction. He's limited ICE. He's reversed the stay in Mexico policy. He sent a very clear message. And by the way, to the extent now that Border Patrol agents are handling the influx of humanity, particularly the children, they're not doing their job.
Right, which involves the drugs and involves the human trafficking and the other issues that are so critical around the border. Hence, the drugs are just flowing in. The overdoses in the last year way up. It's really even more of a problem than it's ever been. And the President Trump had actually started to make a dent in those issues as well.
Well, talk about fentanyl for a second, because you're really the expert on transshipments of illegal drugs.
Well, that involved a policy with China as well.
Right.
And certainly the president had a policy with China. A lot of the fentanyl was originally coming in through the mail. That stopped, but now it's coming in through that southern border. And one hit of fentanyl in whatever you're taking will kill.
You've seen
our
that.
nephew.
Yeah.
Our nephew is
it.
one of them, one of the victims of that. But fentanyl is just deadly in one use, one time, and you're done. So it's incredibly dangerous. It's being walked right over that border. The Rio Grande, you can literally walk the drugs across. So I think that it's just such a critical issue, and I'd say every American family is touched by addiction, and so America really is touched by this. And President Trump had a real policy regarding it. He did have negotiations with China as it came to fentanyl. So we're in for it for the next 2 years. The numbers are already 10,000 more deaths in 2020 than in 2019.
Fentanyl-related deaths.
No, overall overdoses. So that is a real issue in this whole border issue, as well as the trafficking of humans and these very vulnerable children that are coming over unescorted. And not to mention that the COVID issue, by the way, we're all busy getting tested for every little thing and vaccinated. And here we are letting people through the border without anything.
So it's a real crisis. The White House doesn't want to admit it is. Everybody knows it is. I think they would gain some credibility if they actually admitted it. We can see it. Now,
well, then they'd have to change a policy.
But we can't really see it, and I'll get to that in a second, as much as we should. There's a real crisis, unaccompanied children, as you point out, no COVID tests, border facilities overcrowded, and the press, of course, for the most part, except the right-wing press, nothing to see here. And to make it worse, the administration's doubled down, taking advantage of the fact that the mainstream press is really part of the administration. They've literally had a blackout with regard to news at the border, which is Can you imagine if Donald Trump had promulgated such a policy? Nothing to see here. Stay away. Don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. It's not a crisis.
Well, the media is so complicit with the Biden administration.
Well, we have a real problem today, and there's a couple bottom lines here. We like to talk about bottom lines on this show. It's the title of the show. Getting back to your earlier point, when government subsidizes a behavior, when anybody subsidizes a behavior, what's the result? You get more of it.
More of that bad behavior.
Whether it's addiction, whether it's homelessness, whether it's illegal immigration, whatever it is, you name it. If you subsidize a behavior, you get more of it. And we're living the very tangible results of that policy today. Now, the third issue this week is related to this issue, and it goes back to your first week in Economics 101, dear. Your first week. Do you remember University of Delaware?
It's a long time ago now.
Oh, wasn't that long ago? Really? How long ago was it? You've been lying to me?
Just last year.
Well, you look like it anyway.
That's right. Good answer.
Here's what's frustrating to me as someone who lives, cares, writes, thinks about economics. Local labor markets with respect to this whole issue of immigration. And I just don't understand how the left can get away with this. So here's the deal. You have one political party generally inviting lots of illegal, mostly marginal, unskilled labor into local labor markets. Principally Texas, but to the extent
California.
That these folks are being shipped out now right around the country. Now, you're still in a pandemic. You still have very high unemployment. You still have a lot of particularly marginal, unskilled workers looking for work.
Right.
So you learned the first week of economics when you have this oversupply of cheap labor in an existing labor market. What's the result when you bring those folks in? You have an oversupply. Well, the price comes down, and a lot of people are going to be looking for work. Some of those people will be looking for work, by the way, are Americans.
Right, especially right now.
So you have an oversupply of cheap labor. It hurts low-income Americans, and nobody's talking about this. Nobody's talking about this, and it leads me to, again, this third issue we want to talk about this week. We see this J.D. Vance now. He's on Fox Live. He talks about this issue a bunch. The impact of progressive policies on blue-collar working-class America is what we're talking about here. So we know that blue-collar America, labor union America, for years had generally voted Republican, top of the ticket. A lot voted for Reagan, a lot voted for Trump and the Bushes, but down ticket, not so much. Pretty much a very strong Democrat influence. What's happened in the Trump era particularly was that it became okay in a lot of these communities, particularly Hispanic communities, to vote Republican, to vote for Donald Trump, right?
Obviously.
We're talking about working poor. We're talking about working class folks. We're talking about, to some extent, skilled, semi-skilled, sometimes unskilled workers, but those at the more of the lower end of the economic ladder, but working hard. Right?
Clinging to their guns and Bibles, I think.
Who said that?
I don't know.
You remember that?
Who said that?
Yeah, who said that? So we've had this. I'm glad you brought that up because you've had this for years. This leftist, progressive disregard for those folks. They cling to their Bibles. They cling to their religion. They cling to their kids. They
the
cling
progressives
to their
are
sons.
those northeast intellectual types.
Well, the coastals, right? The coastals, as we call them, and so. They were very upset in 2016 and 2020 about the fact that 67 million votes or 63 million first time, 74 million second time for President Trump, and it was a lot of these folks who hadn't voted Republican in the past. These blue collar folks, sometimes union folks, again, semi-skilled workers, most without college educations, and already the elites look down on them. And now with the voting record of recent years, voting for people like Donald Trump, the disregard is real.
Well, they certainly don't care. Look at what's been done for the Keystone Pipeline.
Well, which leads me to my list.
Okay.
Were you looking at my notes?
No.
Okay.
I was not.
So, just in
Great
the first
minds think
couple
alike.
weeks, just in the first couple weeks of this administration, you've had now. I hate using the term war, and you've heard me say this in the past. I've never been in a war, and I've talked to people who have been in wars, including my dad,
Right.
and there's nothing like being in a war. But this is, I'll say, a campaign against the working poor and blue-collar America. So what have we had? We've had Keystone Pipeline shuttered. We've had a freeze on oil and gas leases. You saw a huge freeze this week with regard to Louisiana.
Which has a huge impact, and it's all being done quietly. And, of course, they're not reporting on it.
Hundreds of thousands of jobs dependent on the health of the oil and gas industry, as we know. Minimum wage increase, which really hurts many marginal workers. Gas price increases we've seen dramatically, which reminds me, I got to fill my car. Remind me of that today. Prolonged lockdowns, the impact on service industries, particularly restaurant workers. We've had prolonged school lockdowns. Now, if your kids are in private school, probably didn't hurt as much, or parochial school probably didn't hurt as much, but for kids in public schools, we've seen some real damage because they've not been in school.
Well, not just the kids, but the people that are supporting the schools working. I'm not even talking about the teachers.
And I'll just throw in here fortuitously
Bus drivers.
The gun issue, because the people who are out there now advocating for gun grabbing are usually the people that have people with guns around them.
It's always the case,
Is
right?
that always the case? So when you take a look at this is 2 months work here. This is only 2 months. This is a real serious campaign against working class America. In my view, it's a punishing campaign against people with blue collars, people who work with their hands, people, most importantly, for the elites who voted for Donald Trump. Now, we've seen in the aftermath of the election, we've seen terms like or phrases such as re-education camps and
What does that sound like? Wow.
Wow. But in very serious tone, the left had to deal with Donald Trump for 4 years. They thought they'd never have to do it because they thought Hillary Clinton was going to be Obama 3, right? They don't ever want to do it again.
Well, guess what? These kinds of policies are going to make sure that those folks come out in even higher numbers next time around. You watch. They're going to have something to compare, which they didn't have the last time.
What are elections about?
I mean, this type of progressive agenda, they're going to be able to compare and say, is this what we want for America? And we haven't even begun to get into so many other issues that are making China, for example, that are making America look foolish. And we are going to be very second rate if we don't turn this around quickly. We continue on this type of agenda. It's only been 2 months.
Well,
and if we continue on, it's going to be a very weakened America. Is that what we want?
You saw the Chinese this past week co-opt the language of the progressive left to embarrass the Biden administration and America.
What better example of here we go socialism than they're repeating what American left,
the people who
is
actually
promoting.
do run concentration camps.
Right, exactly.
Right? So, folks, that's enough for you to chew on this week. I think we
try not to depress too deeply from week to week, but we have to point out what's
going on. Why should our listeners be different than us?
Because we need people to react. We need you to react.
We need you
to get involved.
We need you to start organizing for 2022. We need you to start showing up at local PTAs and fighting the real influence of
on your children,
progressivism on your school children. We need you to show up at town halls when your member of Congress sponsor them in your district to shout loud and hard, particularly with respect to those Democrats who run on quote-unquote moderate platforms.
We need you to write letters to your college and university and don't give them any money as long as they continue this progressive teachings without any counter viewpoints on those campuses.
We need you to redirect your dollars to there's dozens and dozens and dozens of conservative organizations, free speech organizations out there today going to bat for college students and Americans in the workplace with regard to speech and freedom. So There's a lot we're going to be talking about in the future in coming shows. We don't want to depress you, as Mrs. Ehrlich just said, but we want you to be worried. We want you to be concerned. But as a result of all that, we want you to be involved
and active
in what needs to be done to get America back on track. America is not perfect. America is always a work in progress. But this fundamental transformation of America into this progressive land with this agenda is not something we want to be a part of, and we invite you to join us.
Thanks for listening. Bottom Line with Bob and Kendel Ehrlich. Have a great week.